The message arrived at the Galactic Council headquarters on a Tuesday morning, transmitted through the standard diplomatic channels. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a human male with short brown hair and a friendly smile. He wore simple clothes that looked nothing like the formal attire expected from planetary representatives. "Greetings to the honored champions of the Galactic Council," the human said, his voice carrying an odd accent that the universal translator struggled with. "My name is Jake Morrison, and I serve as the administrator for the human colony on New, Texas. We would like to extend a formal invitation to your most esteemed warriors to join us for a celebration dinner." The three alien champions present in the council chamber exchanged glances. Zethkri, the towering reptilian saurian, flicked his forked tongue in what his species considered amusement. His scales were dark green with battle scars crisscrossing his muscular frame. He had fought in over 100 battles across the galaxy and had never met a species he couldn't defeat. Vel, quote, Anya Kama. The crystalline ethereal hummed softly as her translucent body caught the light from the chamber's energy cores. Her psychic abilities allowed her to sense emotions across vast distances, but these humans remained frustratingly difficult to read. Their minds seemed chaotic and unpredictable. Grok's quote, Tar Kama, the massive insectoid from the hive worlds, clicked his mandibles together in a sound that resembled laughter. His natural armor plating gleamed black under the artificial lights, and his compound eyes could detect movement from miles away. To him, these soft-skinned mammals looked like prey animals. The human continued speaking. "We recently received word that our planet Earth has been accepted into the Galactic Federation. This is a momentous occasion for our people, and we would like to share our joy with representatives of the Council. We plan to host what we call a traditional Texas barbecue feast in your honor." "Barbecue?" Zethkri spoke the word carefully, testing how it felt on his tongue. The universal translator provided no clear meaning, only suggesting it involved food preparation using fire. "A primitive cooking method," Velanya observed, her mental voice echoing in the chamber. "They use uncontrolled combustion to prepare their nutrition." The human's image smiled wider. "We know that different species have different dietary needs, so our xenobiologist Lisa Carter has been working hard to prepare foods that will be safe and enjoyable for everyone. We promise this will be an experience unlike anything you've encountered before." Grokstar's antennae twitched. When these deathworlders say unlike anything, they usually mean dangerous. The human seemed unaware of their conversation. "The celebration will take place this Saturday evening at our community center. We've invited all the families from our settlement, so you'll get to experience genuine human hospitality and culture. We can't wait to show you what makes our species special." When the message ended, the three champions sat in silence for a moment. Earth had been classified as a Class 12 deathworld, meaning it was among the most hostile planets known to support life. The fact that humans had not only survived but thrived on such a world had earned them a grudging respect from the galactic community. "Should we accept?" Velanya asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Zeth stood to his full height of 8 feet. Of course, it would be educational to observe how deathworlders conduct their social rituals. Besides, how dangerous could a simple meal be? Grokstar's mandibles clicked again. "My hive mind has been curious about human behavior. They seem to approach everything with such strange enthusiasm. This could provide valuable intelligence." The decision was unanimous. Within an hour, their response had been transmitted to New Texas, accepting the invitation and informing the humans that they would arrive on Saturday as requested. 3 days later, their ships descended through New Texas's atmosphere. The planet looked remarkably similar to descriptions of Earth, with blue skies, white clouds, and vast expanses of green vegetation. It was hard to believe this was a death world when it appeared so peaceful and welcoming. The human settlement sprawled across a valley between 2 mountain ranges. The buildings were simple structures made of local materials, nothing like the gleaming metal cities found on most civilized worlds. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and they could see humans moving about their daily business with no apparent concern for the dangerous environment surrounding them. Their ships landed in a designated area outside the settlement. Jake Morrison, was waiting for them along with a human female with blonde hair tied back in a practical style. She wore clothing covered in pockets and carried what appeared to be a scanning device. "Welcome to New Texas," Jake called out as the champions emerged from their ships. His enthusiasm seemed genuine, though Velania detected an undercurrent of nervousness. "This is Lisa Carter, our xenobiologist and cultural liaison. She's been working around the clock to make sure everything will be perfect for tonight." Lisa stepped forward and made a gesture that the universal translator identified as a respectful greeting. "It's an honor to meet such distinguished warriors. I've studied your dietary requirements and cultural preferences. I think you'll find our preparations interesting." Zethkri noticed that she chose her words carefully, as if there was more, meaning hidden beneath them. "We appreciate your efforts. We are curious to learn about human customs." "Oh, you're definitely going to learn something tonight," Lisa said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Our community is very excited to meet you. It's not often we get visitors of your caliber." Jake gestured toward the settlement. "The celebration doesn't start for a few hours yet, but would you like a tour of our colony? We could show you how we've adapted to life on New Texas." As they walked through the settlement, the champions observed the humans going about their daily activities. Children played games that seemed to involve a lot of running and shouting. Adults worked with tools and machinery that looked both primitive and effective. Everyone they passed stopped to stare at the visitors with obvious curiosity, but there was no fear in their expressions. "Your people seem remarkably calm," Grokstar observed. "Most species show more concern when meeting unfamiliar aliens." Jake laughed. "We're used to dealing with dangerous situations. New Texas keeps us on our toes, but we've learned to adapt. Besides, you're our guests. Making visitors feel welcome is something we take seriously." The tour ended at a large building in the center of the settlement. Colorful fabric banners hung from the walls, and strings of small lights had been attached to every available surface. The structure looked festive and inviting, though the champions noticed it was built much more solidly than its cheerful appearance suggested. "This is our community center," Lisa explained. "Tonight's feast will be held here. I hope you brought your appetites because we've prepared quite a spread." The three champions exchanged glances. How elaborate could a meal prepared by primitive deathworlders possibly be? The sun was setting over New Texas when the champions returned to the community center. The building had been transformed in the few hours since their tour. More lights had been strung up, casting a warm glow over everything. Tables made of rough wood had been arranged in long rows, covered with checkered cloth that the humans seemed to find decorative. The sound of voices and laughter drifted from inside the building. Through the windows, they could see dozens of humans of all ages moving around, setting up chairs and arranging what appeared to be eating utensils. The children were particularly active, running between the adults with excited energy. "Quite a gathering," Zethkri observed, his reptilian eyes taking in every detail. "How many humans live in this settlement?" Jake Morrison appeared beside them, wearing clothes that looked slightly more formal than his usual attire, though still simple by galactic standards. "About 200 families, so roughly 800 people total. Pretty much everyone wanted to come tonight. It's not often we get to show off our hospitality to such important guests." Velania's psychic senses detected waves of anticipation and excitement from the humans inside. There was something else too, an emotion she couldn't quite identify. It felt like pride mixed with something that might have been mischief. "Before we go in," Lisa Carter said, joining them at the entrance, "I should explain a bit about what you're going to experience. Human food culture is quite different from what most species consider normal nutrition." Grokstar's compound eyes focused on her. "Different how?" Lisa seemed to be choosing her words carefully again. "Well, we don't just eat for sustenance. Food is a form of art, a way to bring people together and a method of expressing creativity. We take great pride in the complexity and intensity of our flavors." "Intensity?" Zethkri repeated the word slowly. "Human taste receptors are quite advanced," Jake added cheerfully. We can detect subtle differences in flavor that most species can't even perceive. What might seem overwhelming to others is just normal cooking to us. The champions exchanged glances. The universal translator was struggling with several terms the humans were using. Words like smoky, spicy, and tender came through as approximate concepts rather than clear meanings. Tonight's menu represents traditional Texas barbecue, Lisa continued. It's a cooking style that originated in the American Southwest, region of Earth. The process involves slow cooking meats over wood fires for many hours, sometimes even days. Days? Velanya's crystalline form flickered with surprise. You prepare food for days? Only the best cuts, Jake said with obvious pride. Good barbecue can't be rushed. We've been preparing for this feast since we received confirmation of your visit. Some of the meats have been smoking for over 72 hours. Groxtar's mandibles clicked nervously. In hive culture, food was processed quickly and efficiently. The idea of deliberately prolonging the preparation process seemed wasteful and strange. The smoking process breaks down the tough fibers in the meat, Lisa explained, apparently noticing their confusion. It also infuses the flesh with complex flavors from the burning wood. Different types of wood create different taste profiles. Tonight we used oak, hickory, and mesquite. The humans spoke about these wood types as if they were precious materials, rather than simple plant matter. The champions were beginning to realize that human food preparation was far more elaborate than they had anticipated. We should probably head inside, Jake suggested. Everyone's eager to meet you and the first course should be ready soon. They entered the community center to find it packed with humans of all ages. The room fell silent for a moment as every eye turned toward the alien visitors. Then Jake raised his voice and called out, "Everyone, I'd like you to meet our honored guests from the Galactic Council." The silence exploded into cheers and applause. Children who had been running around moments before now stood politely with their parents, though their eyes were wide with curiosity. Several elderly humans nodded respectfully, while younger adults whispered excitedly to each other. The champions were guided to a table at the front of the room, where 3 specially modified chairs had been set up to accommodate their different body types. The wood was sturdy enough to support Groxtar's weight. The seat was heated for Zethkri's cold-blooded metabolism, and Velanya's chair had been fitted with energy conductors that would keep her crystalline form stable. Such attention to detail, Velanya observed, genuinely impressed by the thoughtfulness. "We want you to be comfortable," Lisa said, taking a seat across from them. "Tonight is about sharing our culture and making new friends." The humans around them had settled into their own seats, but the excitement in the room was still palpable. Conversations buzzed from every table, and the champions caught fragments of discussion about cooking times, seasoning blends, and something called the good stuff that several humans seemed particularly eager to try. A group of younger humans emerged from what appeared to be a kitchen area, carrying pitchers of various liquids. They moved between the tables, filling containers that the universal translator identified as drinking vessels. "Sweet tea, beer, and lemonade," Jake explained, gesturing to the pitchers. "Traditional barbecue beverages. We weren't sure what would be safe for your species to drink, so Lisa prepared some neutral alternatives for you." The smell that had been lingering in the background suddenly intensified. It was unlike anything the champions had encountered before. A complex mixture of smoke, spices, and something that triggered unexpected responses in their enhanced senses. Zethkri's pupils dilated as his predator instincts responded to sense. His brain couldn't quite categorize. "That's the meat finishing up," a human woman called out from across the room. "Another few minutes and we'll be ready to eat." The excitement in the room ratcheted up another level. Humans began arranging themselves more carefully at their tables, and the champions noticed that eating utensils had been laid out with almost military precision. These weren't the simple nutrition dispensers they had expected, but an array of specialized tools that suggested the consumption process would be far more complex than anticipated. "I hope you brought your appetites," Jake said with a grin that showed far too many teeth for the champion's comfort. "We've prepared enough food to feed an army." Velanya's psychic abilities detected something in his emotional state that made her crystalline form dim slightly. The human wasn't lying, but there was something about his enthusiasm that felt almost predatory. "How much food are we talking about?" Grokster asked, his translator making his voice sound more nervous than he intended. Lisa consulted a device she pulled from one of her many pockets. "Let's see. We've got about 30 pounds of brisket, 20 pounds of pulled pork, 15 whole chickens, 4 racks of ribs, and various sides. That should be enough for everyone to have a good portion." The numbers meant nothing to the champions until their universal translators processed the quantities and converted them to familiar measurements. The amount of protein the humans were planning to consume was staggering, enough to feed small armies on their respective homeworlds. "That's quite substantial," Zethkri managed to say. "Oh, this is just a regular family gathering," Jake replied casually. "You should see what we do for the really big celebrations." Before any of the champions could respond to this terrifying statement, the kitchen doors swung open, and the first course of what the humans cheerfully called their barbecue feast began to emerge. Jake Morrison emerged from the kitchen area, carrying a large platter that steamed and sizzled in the warm air. The smell that accompanied him was so intense that all 3 champions felt their bodies react in ways they hadn't expected. Zethkri's nostrils flared wide, Velanya's crystalline surface began to resonate with harmonic frequencies, and Grokstar's antennae twitched so violently that other humans noticed and pointed. "All right, everyone," Jake announced with obvious pride. "We're starting tonight with Kansas City burnt ends. These beauties have been smoking for 18 hours in oak and hickory." He set the platter down in the center of the champions' table with a flourish. The contents looked like chunks of charred flesh still glistening with moisture and coated in a dark, mysterious sauce. Steam rose from the meat, carrying scents that seemed to bypass the aliens' conscious minds and speak directly to something much more primitive. The humans throughout the room cheered and applauded as if Jake had just presented them with precious gems instead of what appeared to be the burned remains of some unfortunate creature. "Burnt ends are cut from the point of a beef brisket," Lisa explained, apparently noticing the champion's stunned expressions. "The name is a bit misleading. They're not actually burnt, just cooked until the outside forms a perfect crust while the inside stays tender and juicy." Velanya's psychic abilities were being overwhelmed by the complexity of what she was sensing. Her mental probes detected layers upon layers of flavor compounds, spice molecules, and chemical reactions that shouldn't exist in nature. The human description of tender and juicy translated into concepts that made her crystalline form flicker with distress. "What animal did this come from?" Zethkri asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the alarm signals his predator brain was sending. "Beef cattle," Jake replied cheerfully. "We raise them here on New Texas. They're descended from earth stock, bred for optimal flavor and tenderness. The cut I used for tonight's burnt ends came from a steer that weighed about 1,200 pounds. The universal translator processed this information and displayed the conversion. 1,200 pounds translated to approximately 540 kilograms of living creature." The champions stared at the platter with new understanding. They were looking at a small portion of what had once been a massive animal, one that would have been considered an apex predator on most worlds. 1,200 pounds, Grokstar repeated slowly, his mandibles clicking in distress. "That's larger than most hive warriors." "Oh, that's not even our biggest," a human woman called out from a nearby table. "Old Murphy's prize bull weighs almost 2,000 pounds. We're saving him for the harvest festival next month." The casual way the humans discussed the consumption of creatures larger than themselves sent chills through all 3 champions. On their homeworlds, beings of such size were either revered as living gods or feared as ultimate predators. Here, they were apparently considered food. "But this is just the appetizer," Jake continued, oblivious to the existential crisis he was creating. "Wait until you see what we've prepared for the main courses." Lisa pulled out her device again and began reading from a list. "Next, we have pulled pork shoulder. That's from pigs that weighed about 300 pounds each. Then we've got smoked beef brisket, barbecued chicken, and pork ribs. For dessert, we're planning banana pudding and peach cobbler." Each item on the list represented another creature that had been consumed by these seemingly harmless humans. The champions began to understand why Earth was classified as a deathworld. Any planet that produced beings capable of hunting and eating such massive prey was clearly far more dangerous than it appeared. A group of human children at a nearby table had begun eating their portions of the burnt ends with obvious enthusiasm. One boy, who couldn't have been more than 10 years old, was methodically working his way through what Grokstar calculated to be enough protein to sustain his entire larval brood for a week. "The children eat this too?" Velanya asked, her mental voice tight with concern. "Kids love barbecue," Jake confirmed with a laugh. "Little Sarah over there is particularly fond of the burnt ends. She can put away almost as much as the adults." Little Sarah, a human female who appeared to be in the early stages of development, looked up at the mention of her name and grinned. Her small teeth were stained with the dark sauce, and she was clutching a piece of meat that was nearly as large as her tiny fist. She waved at the champions before returning to her meal with predatory focus. The sight of human younglings casually consuming apex predator flesh while making happy noises was perhaps the most disturbing thing the champions had witnessed in their long careers. On their world, such behavior would indicate a species so dangerous that immediate evacuation would be recommended. "How often do your people engage in these feeding behaviors?" Zethkri asked, trying to maintain his composure. "Barbecue? Oh, pretty regularly," Jake replied, taking a seat and beginning to serve himself from the platter. "Most families do it at least once a week. During summer months, it's practically daily. Nothing brings people together like good barbecue." The champions watched in fascination and horror as Jake began to consume the burnt ends with obvious pleasure. His technique was efficient and practiced, suggesting that this wasn't a special occasion behavior but a routine activity. The other humans around the room were eating with similar skill and enthusiasm. "The sauce is our own recipe," Lisa added, pointing to the glistening coating on the meat. "It's got molasses, brown sugar, vinegar, tomato paste, and about 15 different spices. The heat level is pretty mild by our standards. We didn't want to overwhelm you." Heat level. Grokstar's translator struggled with the concept. "Spiciness," she clarified. "Most of our barbecue sauce contains capsaicin and other compounds that create a burning sensation. It's quite enjoyable once you get used to it. This batch only has a small amount, barely enough to notice." The idea that these humans regularly consumed chemical compounds that created burning sensations for pleasure was the final piece of the puzzle. The champions now understood that they weren't just observing a meal. They were witnessing a demonstration of why humans had survived on a deathworld. Any species that could casually consume massive predators while ingesting chemical compounds for recreational purposes was clearly operating on a level of aggression and resilience that defied conventional understanding. "We should probably try some," Velanya suggested quietly, her mental voice resigned to the inevitable. It would be impolite to refuse their hospitality. Jake immediately perked up. "Absolutely. Lisa prepared some special portions that should be safe for your digestive systems. Much milder flavoring and adjusted for your nutritional needs." As Lisa began serving them carefully prepared samples, the champions realized that this simple meal was going to be far more educational than they had anticipated. They were about to discover firsthand what it meant to share food with apex predators who considered the consumption of other apex predators to be a casual social activity. The first bite would change everything they thought they knew about humanity. The burnt ends were just the beginning. As the evening progressed, Jake Morrison and his helpers brought out course after course of what they cheerfully called traditional barbecue. Each new platter that emerged from the kitchen was larger and more intimidating than the last. The pulled pork shoulder arrived on a serving dish the size of a small shield. The meat had been shredded into fine strands that Jake explained had once been part of a single muscle, weighing over 20 pounds. He demonstrated the proper eating technique by piling the pork onto a soft bread roll and consuming it in several large bites, his expression showing nothing but satisfaction. This particular shoulder was smoked for 14 hours, he explained, between bites. Low and slow cooking breaks down all the connective tissue and renders the fat. The result is meat so tender you could cut it with a fork. Zethkri watched a human grandmother at the next table demolish her portion of pulled pork with mechanical efficiency. Her technique was flawless, and she showed no sign of slowing down, despite having already consumed what would have been a full meal by Saurian standards. When she finished, she looked around hopefully for more. "Could I get seconds on that pork, honey?" she called out to Jake. "It's just as good as what my grandmother used to make back on Earth." The casual request for additional portions of apex predator flesh delivered in such a sweet, innocent tone made Zethkri's tail twitch involuntarily. This elderly human female, who couldn't weigh more than 50 kilograms, was requesting additional helpings of meat from creatures that outweighed her by a factor of 6. Next came the beef brisket, a massive slab of meat that Jake carved with practiced strokes of a knife that looked suspiciously like a weapon. The blade cut through the flesh with ease, revealing layers of smoke-darkened exterior and tender pink interior. The portions he served were enormous by galactic standards, but the humans accepted them as if they were perfectly normal serving sizes. "Brisket is the holy grail of barbecue," Jake explained as he worked. "It takes skill to get it right. This one was in the smoker for 16 hours at exactly 225 degrees. The internal temperature had to reach 203 degrees before it was ready." The precision with which he described the cooking process was disturbing. Jake spoke about temperature control and timing with the same attention to detail that military tacticians used when planning orbital bombardments. The level of expertise required suggested that humans had been perfecting these techniques for generations. Vel, quote, Anya, quote, S psychic abilities were completely overwhelmed by the sensory input. Every new dish that appeared created cascading waves of complex flavors and chemical compounds that her crystalline structure couldn't process. The humans around her were generating emotional states she had never encountered before, a combination of satisfaction, pleasure, and something that felt almost like bloodlust, though expressed through consumption rather than combat. "Are you feeling all right?" Lisa asked, noticing Velanya's increasingly erratic flickering. "Your energy patterns look unstable." "Too much sensory input," Velanya managed to communicate. "The complexity of these flavors is beyond my processing capabilities." "Oh, we're just getting started," Lisa replied with what she probably thought was a reassuring smile. "Wait until you see the ribs." The ribs arrived as if summoned by her words. 3 full racks of what Jake proudly announced were St. Louis-style pork ribs, each rack containing enough meat to feed a small squad of soldiers. The bones were massive, and the meat that covered them was thick with layers of spice coating that had formed a dark crust during the smoking process. Human children throughout the room immediately perked up at the sight of the ribs. Their eyes lit up with excitement, and several began making requests for specific pieces. The champions watched in stunned fascination as 10-year-old humans wielded the rib bones like clubs, gnawing the meat from them with obvious pleasure. "Ribs are finger food," Jake explained helpfully. "You just pick them up and eat them directly. Don't worry about manners. Barbecue is supposed to be messy." The sight of an entire room full of humans casually tearing meat from bones with their teeth was perhaps the most primal display the champions had ever witnessed. These weren't civilized beings consuming processed nutrition. These were apex predators engaging in feeding behavior that their species had probably practiced since before they developed space travel. Grok's, quote, tar, quote, S compound eyes tracked the movement of a human male who was working his way through what appeared to be an entire rack of ribs by himself. The human's technique was efficient and thorough, leaving the bones completely clean before moving on to the next one. His expression was one of pure contentment, as if this level of consumption was not only normal but deeply satisfying. "How much can a single human consume in one meal?" Grokstar asked, his translator making the question sound more clinical than his growing alarm warranted. "Depends on the occasion," Jake replied cheerfully. "Tonight's portions are pretty standard. For a celebration, maybe 2 to 3 pounds of meat per person, plus sides. During competitive eating events, some people can manage much more." The mathematical implications hit all 3 champions simultaneously. 2 to 3 pounds of meat per person, multiplied by 800 humans meant they were witnessing the consumption of over 2,000 pounds of apex predator flesh in a single evening. This was more than the total annual protein consumption of entire civilizations on some worlds. Competitive eating events? Sethkree repeated weakly. Sure. We hold barbecue competitions pretty regularly. Last month, Big Pete managed to eat 12 pounds of brisket in 30 minutes. It was a new colony record. The idea that humans had turned the consumption of massive quantities of meat into a competitive sport was so disturbing that all three champions simultaneously began updating their threat assessments of the human species. Any beings that could consume 12 pounds of apex predator flesh in 30 minutes for entertainment purposes were clearly operating on a level of biological efficiency that defied conventional understanding. The meal continued with side dishes that were equally intimidating. Beans that had been slow-cooked with additional pieces of meat, cornbread that contained enough calories to sustain a small person for days, and something called coleslaw that Jake explained was a vegetable dish designed to cut through the richness of the meat. Even their vegetables were apparently optimized to enhance the consumption of additional flesh. As the evening wore on, the champions began to understand that they weren't just observing a meal, they were witnessing a demonstration of human dominance over their environment. These beings had taken creatures that would be considered apex predators on most worlds and turned them into casual food sources. They had developed cooking techniques that required days of preparation and precision timing that rivaled military operations. Most disturbing of all, they had turned this display of predatory supremacy into a social activity that brought their communities together and strengthened their bonds. Save room for dessert, Jake announced as the main courses were finally finished. We've got banana pudding and peach cobbler waiting in the kitchen. The fact that humans had additional food prepared after this massive display of consumption was the final confirmation the champions needed. They were not dealing with a primitive species that had accidentally survived on a death world. They were facing apex predators who had mastered their environment so completely that they treated the consumption of other apex predators as a recreational activity suitable for children. The implications were terrifying. The three champions sat in stunned silence as the humans around them began clearing plates and preparing for dessert. What they had witnessed over the past 3 hours had fundamentally changed their understanding of the species they were dealing with. The casual efficiency with which an entire community had consumed enough apex predator flesh to feed small armies was beyond anything in their experience. Jake Morrison approached their table with a concerned expression. You folks have been pretty quiet. I hope the food wasn't too overwhelming. Lisa warned me that we might need to tone things down for alien digestive systems. Tone things down? Vilania's mental voice was barely a whisper. Her crystalline form had dimmed to almost complete transparency as she struggled to process what she had observed. Well, we didn't use any of the really hot sauces, Jake explained apologetically, and we kept the spice levels pretty mild. Plus, Lisa made sure all the meat was cooked to safe temperatures for your species. I know it might seem a bit bland compared to what we're used to, but we wanted to make sure you could actually eat it. The idea that this overwhelming display of carnivorous consumption had been toned down for their benefit was perhaps more disturbing than anything else they had witnessed. If this was humans showing restraint, what did their normal feeding behavior look like? This was restrained? Sethkree managed to ask. Oh, sure, Jake replied with a cheerful smile. We didn't want to scare you off with the really intense stuff. Wait until you experience a proper Texas chili cook-off or maybe a crawfish boil. Now those are events that'll really show you what human food culture is all about. The champions exchanged glances of pure terror. There were apparently levels of human feeding behavior that were even more extreme than what they had just witnessed. The implications for galactic security were staggering. Lisa Carter joined them, carrying a device that was displaying various readings. I've been monitoring your biological responses throughout the evening. Very interesting data. Your stress indicators spiked significantly when Jake mentioned the cooking times and meat quantities. Stress indicators. Grockstar's mandibles clicked nervously. It's completely understandable, Lisa assured them. Most species find human food culture overwhelming at first. The complexity of our flavor profiles, the quantities we consume, and the social rituals surrounding meals are quite different from standard galactic norms. She paused to consult her device again. What's particularly fascinating is that your reactions follow the same pattern we see when apex predators encounter a superior predator species. Classic threat assessment behaviors combined with submission responses. The fact that she could analyze their psychological states with such clinical precision while discussing their terror as if it were a mildly interesting research data point was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire evening. We're not usually considered prey animals, Zethkri said quietly, his reptilian brain still processing the implications of what he had witnessed. Oh, you're not prey, Jake said quickly, apparently misunderstanding the source of their distress. You're our honored guests. We'd never hunt sentient beings. That would be completely inappropriate. The casual way he dismissed the concept of hunting sentient beings, while simultaneously demonstrating the efficiency with which humans could process massive amounts of meat, was not as reassuring as he probably intended it to be. Around them, human families were finishing their meals and beginning to socialize. Children who had consumed enough protein to sustain adult warriors were now running around the room, playing games that seemed to involve a lot of chasing and mock combat. Their energy levels appeared to be completely unaffected by the massive quantities of food they had just processed. The children, Velanya observed, they show no signs of digestive stress despite consuming quantities that would incapacitate most adult beings. Kids bounce back fast, Lisa agreed. Human digestive systems are extremely efficient. We've evolved to process large quantities of protein and fat very quickly. It's one of the adaptations that allowed us to thrive on Earth. An elderly human woman approached their table, moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being in charge. You boys didn't eat much, she observed, looking at their barely touched plates. Are you sure you're feeling all right? Maybe you'd like to take some leftovers back to your ships? The offer to take additional quantities of apex predator flesh back to their ships was delivered with such maternal concern that it somehow made the entire situation even more surreal. This grandmother was offering to send them home with enough meat to feed their crews for weeks, and she was worried that they hadn't eaten enough. That's very kind, Zethkri managed to say, but we have different nutritional requirements. Well, if you change your minds, just let us know, she said with a pat on his scaly shoulder that made him flinch involuntarily. We've got plenty more where that came from. As the evening wound down, the champions found themselves standing outside the community center with Jake and Lisa, watching as families loaded their vehicles with containers of leftover food. The quantities being transported suggested that many families would be eating the remains of tonight's feast for days to come. Thank you for sharing your cultural traditions with us, Velanya said formally, her training in diplomatic protocol helping her maintain composure despite her ongoing distress. This has been educational. We're so glad you could join us, Jake replied with genuine warmth. It means a lot to our community to be able to share our hospitality with distinguished visitors like yourselves. We hope this is just the beginning of a long friendship between our peoples, Lisa added. Next month we're planning a fish fry for the visiting Aquatic Federation delegates. You should come back for that if you can. The casual mention of another feeding event designed to demonstrate human dietary dominance to different alien species confirmed what the champions had already begun to suspect. This wasn't just a random cultural tradition, it was a systematic method of establishing the human position in the galactic hierarchy through displays of predatory supremacy. As their ships lifted off from New Texas and headed back toward Galactic Council space, the three champions sat in their respective command centers, each processing what they had learned in their own way. Zeth, quote, Kree was the first to break the silence over their communication link. I'm updating my tactical assessment of human military capabilities. Any species that treats apex predator consumption as a casual social activity cannot be evaluated using standard threat models. Agreed. Grokstar responded, his mandibles still clicking nervously. My hive mind is recommending immediate reclassification of humans from potential allies to beings who must be kept satisfied at all costs. Velanya's mental voice was thoughtful. What disturbs me most is their complete lack of awareness regarding the psychological impact of their behavior. They genuinely believed they were being hospitable and restrained, which suggests, Zethkri concluded grimly, that this demonstration was not intended as a threat display. This is simply how they live. The three champions spent the rest of their journey home composing reports that would fundamentally change how the Galactic Council approached relations with humanity. Their recommendations were unanimous. Treat humans as apex predators who had achieved spaceflight, maintain friendly relations at all costs, and never, under any circumstances, give them a reason to view other species as potential food sources. The final line of Zethkri's report would become legendary in Council archives. Recommend immediate implementation of Feed the Humans First protocol for all future diplomatic encounters. Species that consider 1,200-pound predators to be appetizers should not be allowed to experience hunger during negotiations. Back on New Texas, Jake Morrison was already planning the menu for next month's fish fry, completely unaware that he had just redefined humanity's position in galactic politics through the simple act of sharing a traditional barbecue dinner with visitors who had never encountered apex predators who cooked their prey with such artistic precision. The age of human diplomacy through superior firepower was ending. The age of human diplomacy through superior food culture had begun.